Gavan.
Let's get here. Look, thanks a million. Minister, it's nice to see you. Before I get on to the substance of our position in relation to this Act, I think it's important to reflect on what we have achieved nationally in relation to COVID. I think the current vaccination rate, fully vaccinated, is around 87%, Minister. Maybe it's slightly higher now. That's a huge achievement. And I think the political consensus on the importance of science and vaccines has been crucial to that. I was chatting to colleagues in the Council of Europe last week where they don't have that consensus. Places like Armenia, where only 10% of the people are vaccinated. And it's not because there's a shortage of vaccines. They actually have ambulances outside market squares inviting people in to get vaccinated, but there's a huge level of government distrust, and unfortunately there's a kind of a far-right opposition in these countries that are anti-vax, anti-science. And I just say that thank God we don't have that in this country, with the possible exception of the odd Tipperary TD. We don't have that, and thank God in that regard. I think it's important to reflect on that and indeed reflect on the progress that has been made. I think that's an important point. While we're on the issue of vaccines, Minister, I may also just raise the issue of the lack of government support to date to call for a waiver on IP, intellectual property rights, for vaccines. That's a huge disappointment to me. I'm sure you will accept the logic that no one is safe until everyone's safe, that we need to assist the third world, the developing world, in a way that we just haven't to date. And we need voices at European level. This again was brought up at Council of Europe last week, and it was really disappointing to hear the EU Commissioner not back the idea of dropping intellectual property rights. It's so depressing to see Western governments aligning themselves with Big Pharma rather than align themselves with the world. We need to give the world the right to produce their own vaccines. And I can't for the life of me understand why this government cannot just make that simple and clear call. So I'd ask you to reflect on that and maybe respond, if you can as well, in relation to your response to this particular debate. Moving on to the issue itself of the powers, I think you're right in what you said, actually. I think there is a consensus that we should extend this legislation until the 22nd of October. Sinn Féin would certainly support that. But we can't support the extension beyond the 22nd of October for the simple reason that restrictions are being lifted, and we welcome that. We want to see that happen on the 22nd. And because this government has shown on several occasions in the past that we can move legislation very, very quickly if needs be. And because we think that it is important to recognise that the extraordinary powers that were granted, we have to be very careful in relation to those powers and how they're managed and how they're granted. I can reflect indeed that when the need arose, we could overnight sign up to a 64 billion bailout for banks. So the idea that we couldn't come in here, if absolutely necessary, to introduce this legislation, it just doesn't fly, Minister. I see that Christmas this year is actually on a Saturday, so even taking your scenario, we could take that week coming up to Christmas and still come back and pass this legislation. Our view is that would be more preferable in terms of respect for civil rights than the tack you're taking. But let me stress, we do think that the approach has been broadly correct. Just in relation to that one issue, we don't agree with you, so it's a respectful difference of opinion in relation to that. Other than that, I would also say I think we need to reflect on the fact that even if these restrictions are dropped on the 22nd of October, we will still have partners who can't join their loved ones in maternity wards. And for the life of me, I can't understand that. I really can't. They're marching out in the rain as we speak while we're conducting this debate. And Minister, again, I might ask you to respond to that point in terms of what else you can do. Because at the moment, and I've spoken to colleagues in Limerick in relation to this, indeed I've stood with them in Limerick, there seems to be a huge disconnect between, on the one hand, what your department is saying and what's actually being implemented. But ultimately, I would argue the buck does stop with you in relation to this issue. And we've all spoken about it. It's come up almost every week in the Shannon since we've come back, and yet it still persists. So again, I'd ask you perhaps to address that issue as well.